Hello there! Welcome back to another video on Joe DeSanto Insights. In this video, I am going to show you the difference between using QuickBooks for your business and using Quicken Personal and Business for your business, and talk about the distinctions and why you might choose one over the other. So let's hop into it right away. Okay, so on my screen here, I have QuickBooks open and Quicken. Now be very specific here. What you're seeing here is what I'm referring to now as Quicken New, or the new web-based Quicken Business and Personal. And just to clarify a little bit further, there is also, the reason I'm saying new is because Quicken still offers its original product, which it calls Quicken Classic now, in personal and business as well. And this is that right here. And to further complicate the matter, for the classic version, which is a locally installed version that runs from a database file on your computer, there is a Mac version and a PC version. So if you have a Mac or a PC and you're going to investigate this question here, which should I use for my business? If you go with Quicken Classic, you would choose between the Mac and the PC locally installed version. Otherwise, if you went with Quicken New, you would be getting the new web-based version. Now, I'll talk about a little bit of the differences between QuickBooks and Quicken Web-based and Quicken Classic. When it comes to QuickBooks, by the way, I guess I should also say is that QuickBooks has a locally installed version as well. That was the original QuickBooks, and now it has a web-based version, QuickBooks Online. So it is also simultaneously running a locally installed product and a web-based product, and you generally have to choose between the two. I guess I'm going to go ahead and say, most likely, whether you go with QuickBooks or Quicken, you probably should go with the new web-based product. Certainly for QuickBooks, I work in both the desktop install and the QuickBooks Online. They're maintaining and supporting both, but there are benefits to the online version, the web-based version, that I've grown to like, and I'm sure that will carry through to the new Quicken web-based version. But let's just get into the basic comparison. So number one comparison is that Quicken is the personal finance software that can also help you manage your business. And it does that actually very well, but I do think that it is under certain circumstances. QuickBooks is a software, I would say, that generally is only meant, not generally, it's only really meant for your business. It just is not created to interweave personal finances and business finances. My general rule of thumb, there's a couple general rules of thumb. If you have this business of yours as a partnership, right, you're not the sole owner, you would not manage it within your personal Quicken setup, because obviously you don't want to intermix a company that has multiple owners with your personal finances. So first and foremost, if you're possibly going to go down the Quicken route, you're going to manage your personal finances and the finances of your business, but your business is likely just going to be you as an owner or you and your spouse. So that's one criteria that I think is important if you're choosing Quicken over QuickBooks. Now, I will say, though, if you have a business that's not too big, but it has multiple partners, you could buy an instance of Quicken Personal and Business and just manage the business finances in an instance of Quicken, because it's cheaper than QuickBooks by leaps and bounds, right? So you can have a user and password for a Quicken instance that's for your personal consulting corp, and then a second one that maybe you're managing the finances of this business with partners, but you would definitely have to have two users and passwords for that. Hey there, quick interruption. If you're worried about your financial future and you're trying to create more peace of mind, check out my course, Personal Finance Mastery. It'll help you do just that. Link below. Now, if you have a business that has partners, or I also say if you solely own it or own it with your spouse, but it's large enough to have payroll and some other more significant not only functional but tax related things, at some point you're probably going to want to switch over to QuickBooks. So ask yourself, I guess, from the beginning, one, how big is your business? Does it have payroll? That's primarily, I think, in terms of size, the sticking point, and I'll explain why. So do you solely own it? And is it large enough? And do you have payroll? At some point, you're going to go with QuickBooks. Now, the payroll, the reason I point out the payroll is this. QuickBooks Online is whatever, at least 35 and up a month. Now, in some cases, 200 a month. But it has a lot of options for integrations. So if you have payroll, you can have your payroll service integrated. What does that mean? It means when you run your payroll, the payroll service feeds the data from your payroll directly into your software so that you don't have to go in and manually enter it. So that's one integration. Now, another thing I would say where you might want to go with QuickBooks is if you're doing any kind of e-commerce because it has integrations with things like Shopify or downloading your e-commerce data. Quicken's not going to have that. So if your business is big enough that it either has payroll or is utilizing other services out there that you need to aggregate data from, QuickBooks is likely going to give you the solution there. They both, and when it comes to invoicing, they both offer invoicing. I will say, though, that QuickBooks invoicing and invoice tracking is definitely a little bit more robust in invoice searching and that sort of stuff. Though the functions of the invoicing is relatively similar, and at the end of the day, you can achieve the same thing with the invoicing in either, but you're going to have, if you have a large volume of invoicing, you probably want to go with QuickBooks. Now, one awesome feature about the new Quicken web-based is that it has finally integrated a payment, like a credit card and bank transfer payment option for invoices. And so you can basically set up a Stripe account, and when you send out an invoice, you can have a payment option on there just like QuickBooks does. So that's pretty great. That's actually one of the bigger selling points. Going back to Quicken Classic over here, it also has invoicing, but it does not have the ability to integrate Stripe in any kind of credit card or bank transfer payment system. So definitely a bonus for the new web-based. I will say, going back to the fact that if you are a single owner corp or spouse, and even if you're doing like a small payroll, you can go ahead and use a third-party payroll service and integrate that with Quicken, but it won't automatically integrate. You would have to basically journal in your payroll activity with each payroll period into Quicken manually. So that's where the integration comes in. If you're just doing payroll for yourself and your spouse once a year, that's what I do. I just journal in the details. I use Gusto for payroll and I journal in the details in Quicken, no problem. But if it's a regular ongoing thing with multiple employees, 2, 3, 4 employees, that's just going to become very tedious and difficult. Now, QuickBooks offers a payroll, speaking of payrolls, and so it has a payroll service built right into the software, so you don't have to go to a third party like Gusto or ADP or whatever. However, payroll softwares are different. I like Gusto over the QuickBooks built-in payroll, to be honest with you, and it's cheaper. So you can use the built-in if you want. You don't have to. If you're switching QuickBooks and you're running payroll, on a third party, you're not going to want to necessarily switch payroll. So back to Quicken personal and business, obviously the benefit there is you can have your personal accounts and business accounts all in one software, but segregate your categorization so that you can run segregated reports for your business and for your personal. So it really is like, again, if you're a consulting corp like me or independent contractor, just go with Quicken. It's set up so well to do everything in one place. And the truth is, if you own the business solely, the business is your money, and it really should be, those accounts should be part of your total overall net worth. Speaking of that, personal finance software is set up to look at your net worth. It's kind of like the balance sheet of personal finance, and it's not dissimilar from balance sheet, your assets, your liabilities, and what your net worth is. And then the other thing it does is produce a report for profit and loss. Slightly different setup, though, I will admit, with Quicken. So the one thing, when it comes to doing personal reports, you're just looking at your income and expense, and you can look at your net worth. However, when you are managing your business activity in Quicken, especially if it's an S-Corp and you have to do a tax return for that S-Corp, you are going to need to produce or want to produce a balance sheet. Quicken doesn't do a fully traditional balance sheet like a QuickBooks would. It's close, though, and it's fine, especially if it's a small consulting corp that's just you or your spouse. But the major distinction is that Quicken has assets and liability accounts, but it does not have equity accounts, and like a QuickBooks does. And ultimately, where that nets out for you if you don't have equity accounts is Quicken will do a balance sheet and it'll look at your assets, liabilities, and then it will summarize all standard asset accounts, which would be net income, retained earnings, maybe a common stock, and then shareholder equity, that kind of stuff. It'll just summarize all that into one line item called equity. QuickBooks, because it has individual equity accounts, is going to show you here equity, retained earnings, net income, etc. So if you're going to a CPA or when you go to do your taxes, they're more likely for a business, particularly an S-Corp, going to be like, hey, where are your equity accounts? And your standard report or Quicken's not going to deliver that. It's going to deliver just a summarized equity. But ultimately, that is fine. In my case, where I do want to share some of those equity accounts, I just go into Excel, I print out my report, I print out my balance sheet, and then I go in and I track those individual equity things like shareholder equity and common stock in an Excel sheet. But I probably don't even need to do that because, relatively speaking, the business tax return is simple. I could just give my CPA the regular report with the equity totaled. And honestly, I think that's kind of closer to how she does it on the tax return anyway. So I don't want to make this video super long, but those are some major distinctions between the two. They obviously look slightly different, but these two options are both web-based. Of course, you can go and use the classic version. That's what I use because I've been using it forever. And as of right now, you cannot convert your Quicken Classic data to the web-based version. I don't know if they're ever going to implement a conversion tool or not. But so I'm sticking with Quicken Classic. And I will say that Quicken Classic is a little bit more hackable than the web-based. But if you're not getting into the advanced user stuff, this is probably fine. Oh, last point I will make. Journal entries. This is an important thing, particularly for year-end tax prep. QuickBooks has a built-in journal entry function, which is a standard sort of regular business level accounting software function. Quicken does not have journal entries built in as a standard function, but you can create a hack. What I do is I just create, you can use an asset or liability account. I add a manual account. I do, let's see, what kind of, just other liability. And I create that account, and then in there, I just enter net zero transactions, and I do one side of the ledger and the other side of the ledger. And you're able to do that in Quicken New Home and Business. The one tip I'll give you that is all expense transactions are by default negative. So in order to get that reverse expense in your split, you actually have to add the positive sign. Little pro tip there. All right, gonna end this here. Hopefully that was helpful. I'll talk to you later. Bye.